Good morning. Dr. Michalis Kritikos will talk about AI ethics in action, the case of the EU's ethics review procedure.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michalis Kritikos. I'm working for the European Commission, more specifically for the ethics, the technology ethics department at DG RTD, DG Research and Innovation. I'm going to explain what we do there, and I'm also wearing another hat. Beyond working for the ethics appraisal mechanism of the Commission, I'm also the scientific secretary of the European Group on Ethics, which is a high-level expert group appointed by the President of the Commission, whose main destination, whose main purpose is to provide opinions on the intersection between fundamental rights and new and emerging technologies. So it's a group that has become quite, I would say, visible throughout the last few years, simply because its opinions and statements, own initiative statements, are somehow echoing and in a way accommodating the different concerns that society as a whole may have when it comes to the design, deployment and commercial application of certain technologies. What I'm going to talk about in the next 30 to 40 minutes is the work of the European Union in the field of artificial intelligence in the domain of ethics that has taken different terms and labelings throughout the last few years. We used to call it responsible innovation in the field of AI. Some actors are calling it trustworthy AI, some others human-centric AI. But all these terms are kind of used interchangeably, and the main idea behind that is that AI systems that are designed and deployed in the EU are ethically sound, comply with the fundamental rights and I would say EU acquis in that domain, and at the end of the day they do not undermine what we call ethical principles and civil liberties of European citizens. And I'm going to explain how exactly this is done, this is achieved, and the different mechanisms and different tools that are in place to achieve that. Okay, so basically, before talking more specifically about the ethics side of things, I'm going to say a few things about, probably you've heard it before, earlier this week, about what the EU is doing in general with regard to AI, and how the whole involvement of the EU started a few years ago. I have also to share an anecdote. When back in 2015, the European Parliament became involved in the field of AI. I used to work for the Parliament at that moment. The Parliament decided to issue the so-called own initiative resolution, legislative resolution, on the civil liability aspects of what we call cyber-physical systems on robots. And that was the first ever initiative at the EU level, the first ever footprint, first ever involvement of the EU in the domain of artificial intelligence. That specific resolution of the Parliament became the trigger for the Commission later on to assume all sorts of different initiatives in the form of communications, action plans, white papers, in order to make itself visible, not for reputational purposes, but in order to take action on certain aspects that the European Parliament resolution put forward, which from that moment onwards became, I would say, a regular activity of the Union, and for those ones that know well how the Union works, right now we have a proper legal framework, we have the EU AI Act, I'm going to talk a bit about that, and also we have all sorts of initiatives at the standardization level, at the ethics governance level, and of course at the innovation level with all sorts of different funding instruments. So back then, the EU, the European Commission more specifically, adopted the so-called European approach to artificial intelligence. That was phrased in a communication that was issued in 2018, There was a declaration of cooperation on AI signed by all 27 member states and the Commission, a coordinated plan, and then we had the white paper that divided this European approach into two pillars. The European approach to excellence, meaning frontier research and excellence in research, and trust. Trust meaning we need to have a proper legal and ethical framework in place in order to gain the trust of the European citizens in this specific technology. So basically, within that approach, there are different, I would say, action lines that have been developed. The legal frontier that has taken mostly the form of the so-called AI Act, the European Act on Artificial Intelligence. Both that act and many actors that work in that field know that quite well. We have the EU Pact, which is used as I would say, a sandboxing exercise for the AI Act. And there are also other initiatives around that, I would say, AI Act or beyond that, the specific piece of regulation that in a way directly or indirectly affect the way AI systems are being developed. And by that I'm referring to the Data Governance Act, I'm referring to the Digital Single Market Act, the Digital Services Act, and other initiatives, legislative initiatives that affect the way data are retrieved, trained, and processed in order to train a specific algorithm or AI system. So we have the legal framework, which actually right now the Commission is trying to specify, is trying to put it into effect in different ways. The AI office, the Artificial Intelligence office that the Commission has established within DG Connect, which is the chef de file, the main DG leading the file on AI, is trying now, along with the member states and expert groups, to come up with codes of conduct, codes of practice, in order to put some flesh into the I would say, sometimes seemingly abstract or vague provisions of the AI Act. So we have legal work that has just started in terms of that act having to be specified and starting to needing to be applied in some of these provisions on the prohibited practices are already in place. We have the innovation frontier where we are involved as DG RTD, not only us, but we have a major stake in that innovation, I would say, domain by organizing calls and putting money in different, I would say, funding streams. Our main stream is the Horizon Europe one, which is one of the biggest funding instruments in the world with 93.5 billion euros involved. And within that innovation, beyond the Horizon Europe, beyond the Digital Europe program and other programs, we have the announcement, we had the announcement a few, let's say, months ago of the establishment of the so-called AI factories, and a few weeks ago of the so-called AI gigafactories. And if there is time, I can also refer to that. So there is, I would say, a lot of intense activities, a lot of, I would say, action in the field of innovation. EU is trying to become relevant in technological terms, is trying to become more competitive. And after the release of the Draghi report and of other reports, you saw that the Commission reacted also by proposing competitiveness fund. The EU is trying to find out how AI innovation can happen, starting from startups and how startups train their models, to how it could support bigger entities in trying to become, let's say, competitive towards the American or Chinese companies. There is a third frontier, which is a more policy one, I would say a more coordinated one, which is taking the form of a coordinated plan. That is important. Why? Because especially at the very beginning of the whole EU involvement in the domain of AI, there was a fear, there was a risk of so-called regulatory fragmentation, that certain member states that were quite advanced in, especially in robot manufacturing, will take the lead and set up their own norms or take their own initiatives that may have undermined the whole EU plan. So there is a coordinated plan where member states are, trying to stay on the same page with the Commission. And next to that, there is the international policy work. EU is not only, and the Commission is not only an internal actor. It doesn't act only within Europe. It also represents EU in different international domains, and in the domain of AI, there are so many nowadays international organizations and negotiation frameworks where the EU is present and tries to also put forward its own narrative, its own approach to artificial intelligence. We also have the ethical governance of AI. This is the field I'm working mostly on, and that has taken the form of principles that have been developed at the EU level. And our work is to kind of translate these principles and break down these general abstract principles into specific guidelines, action steps as we call them, in order for researchers to be guided well when they are trying to design AI systems. And last but not least, we have the codes of practice and the standards. The standardization domain is quite, again, very, I would say, active field of quite, I would say, dynamic field of action when it comes to set up standards in different dimensions and aspects of AI development. They're mostly safety standards, but we also see the emergence of standards that touch upon some of the ethical side of things. And this is work done mostly in 3 organizations, ISO, IEEE, and CEN-CENELEC, the European ones. Now, when it comes to, I'll try now to zoom into the ethics side of things. The involvement of the EU in the field of ethics is, I would say, a quite tricky process. It's a sensitive process simply because the EU doesn't enjoy the so-called hard law competencies in the field of ethics. There is no way for the European Union to dictate ethical norms on member states. There is no way to impose certain ethical interpretations or principles upon member states. Of course, we have the fundamental rights acquis, we have the Charter on Fundamental Rights, we have different, let's say, principles and standards mentioned also in the founding treaties. But when it comes to what we call moral questions, ranging from the use of human embryonic stem cells to issues and questions on euthanasia or abortion, their member states retain their own prerogatives and their own rights to adopt and interpret principles in their own way. So within that very thin time frame, the EU managed to get some competencies attached to its role as a funder, a research funder. So every research funder, being a university, a state, or international organization, has a special responsibility to ensure that funding, that money goes to actions, to research actions that are ethically sound. And that is how EU got involved also in the field of research ethics, by having an extra obligation as a funder to protect its reputation, but also to make sure that public money, and we're talking about huge money, goes into the right direction. And that is why we exist. The ethics appraisal mechanism of the Commission is there to guarantee, to assess whether research actions that have been pre-selected for being funded on scientific terms are going to be, let's say, implemented in an ethically sound way. But for that, again, if there is time, I can explain how it works. When it comes to AI, funny enough, there was no, I would say, question on why the EU, back in 2019, decided to set up an expert group for that group to issue guidelines on the so-called AI, trustworthy AI. So basically, they brought together 52 experts from different parts of the world and from different domains, industry, academia, and NGOs, civil society, to come up with some requirements, some prerequisites as to what should be labeled as a trustworthy AI system. And this is work, this was a piece of, I would say, brilliant work that became the cornerstone of what the Commission, what the EU is doing right now. So the high-level expert group on AI issued the EU guidelines, and they also, I would say, surprisingly enough, and I'm saying that on a very positive note, they didn't limit themselves to the adoption of guidelines, but they also went a step further, and they tried to, let's say, come up with a self-assessment questionnaire that could help commercial entities mostly, but also academic actors, to find out as to whether their own work complies with these principles. So they went a bit further in order to, in a way, make these principles a bit more tangible. After that, we kind of took over, we set up the AI ethics appraisal mechanism, and that mechanism, which is there to assess research proposals from an ethics point of view and whether they comply with these principles, this is work which is done within the Commission, within DGRTD, and allows us to issue standards, organize training activities, fund projects that work on developing methodologies in the field of AI ethics, but also, what I said at the very beginning, operationalize AI ethics principles. And this is work which is quite, I would say, challenging. These are the ethics guidelines that the high-level expert group came up with back in 2019. I don't know if I should say, and I'm now thinking, I kind of moving forward under the assumption that you all know why we talk about the ethics of AI. So I don't know if I should go a bit back and zoom out and explain what the ethical challenges are when it comes to the design of the systems. But given the opportunity that we have the principles in front of us, I would say that this group came up with these principles simply because there was a need, and there is a need, for these systems to be supervised, and there are different ways to do that. So that became an ethics requirement, human agency and oversight, and there are legal and technological concepts, starting from the human in the loop or human on the loop, to what we called back in 2015 in the European Parliament a switch-on, switch-off way of making sure that at the end of the day, these systems do not develop what we call irreversible risks. We have the technical robustness and safety requirement, which is becoming quite important, and we all know the need and the importance of these systems to be cyber resilient, to be, I would say, to follow the so-called data integrity principles well, and at the end of the day to are robust enough in order to provide us with equally robust outcomes. We have a discussion on privacy and data governance. This is a discussion that sometimes overrides any other ethics discussion or legal discussion on AI. AI being quite, I would say, data-hungry technology, unavoidably the discussion most of the times ends up being about what kind of data is used and what kind of data sets are involved in the training of certain algorithms. The discussion on transparency, again, the so-called black box nature of AI and how we can unfold this, open up this box in order to find out the rationale behind a certain decision, a certain outcome. Diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness, that's another requirement that they came up within that exercise, and that mostly refers to the fairness, the non-discriminatory effects of these systems. The environmental well-being, and then that is something that is upcoming. When the expert group came up with these guidelines 6 years ago, this environmental side of things looked a bit strange. Right now, with the large language models in place, with huge data centers being built around the world, and with so-called digital and green transition having to take to move forward hand in hand, the discussion on the environmental footprint of AI becomes a big discussion and becomes a major discussion, not only in technical terms, not only among experts, but also in policy terms. And there is time, again, I can say a few things about what the Commission is preparing, especially when it comes to data centers and how it can green them, can make them a bit more sustainable. And last but not least, we have the accountability discussion, which is mostly a legal discussion about who could be called accountable or liable if something goes wrong, starting from self-driving cars to self-learning algorithms. This is, I would say, quite a legally complex discussion. The resolution I was talking about back in 2017 set forward 4 scenarios. None of them was picked up. The Commission, a few years later, introduced a legal proposal for an AI liability framework that was withdrawn a few months ago in the name of the so-called simplification. And we are trying now to find out, and actors in the field are trying to find out what is the law of what is the existing, what needs to be applied when it comes to these systems from a liability perspective. Of course, we have the general product liability framework, but some actors are asking for an AI-specific one. So we are going to see whether that goes forward anytime soon. So going back to what we do, and that's why I called this kind of presentation as ethics in action. It's not ethics as a philosophical notion, it's not ethics as an abstract set of principles, it's not ethics or as a textbook material, it's ethics that is applied. And when we say applied, it's legally required. So there is no way for all these thousands of researchers, companies, universities that yet receive EU funds, not to comply with these principles, because that would mean, that we could stop the research, we could freeze the funds, we can retrieve the funds, and that would, I would say, backfire and undermine the whole research project. So research ethics or technology ethics or applied ethics in our domain, in our, I would say, trajectory is a serious business. It's a corporate process, meaning that it also applied across the whole EU family of research actions. And a few years ago, we decided that AI should become a self-standing ethics issue. We have some ethics issues that at the very end of each and every application of Horizon Europe, there is an ethics section where researchers or applicants, as we call them, are expected to tick one of these boxes as to whether they think that the research touches upon one of these issues. And these issues are data, involvement of personal data, involvement of human beings, involvement of animals, issues that relate to misuse of research, issues that relate to environmental effects of research. And all these are self-standing ethics issues, meaning that by the time you, as an applicant, tick this box, the whole ethics appraisal process is mobilized, meaning that then your research goes through the so-called the self-assessment journey and gets into the so-called pre-screening, screening, assessment and review process, depending on the seriousness of the issues involved. So we decided that for the first time in the kind of history of ethics appraisal process, a certain technology should become a self-standing ethics issue. And that's how we thought about AI. At that moment also AI being not that well-known, I would say. And we decided to take what we call precautionary approach and make sure that any type of research that involves AI in one way or the other should go through an ethics panel. And I think I now have the opportunity to explain how the process works. We receive proposals in order for them to be assessed from an ethics point of view. And what we do is we don't assess them themselves. We set up ad hoc ethics review panels. We invite experts remotely but also in Brussels to sit together and discuss a certain project. Usually they discuss more than a project. They discuss more than, I would say, 10 projects or 12 projects. And they come up with a report. That report that contains recommendations and requirements becomes part of the contract signed between the European Commission and the university or the individual fellow, if it's a Marie Curie fellowship or an ERC grant. That becomes a legal requirement. So depending on the seriousness of the issue involved, that specific process may be what we call an ethics pre-screening process, where that is done mostly internally, or a screening process where you have two experts involved and they issue a mini report, or an ethics assessment process, where we think that, especially when it comes to AI, these issues are serious, are complex, and 5 to 7 experts need to look at the project, and they come up with sometimes a big report, not a 3 or 4 page report. They come up with most of the times 8 or 9-page report, where they try to guide also the applicant or the beneficiary, because sometimes we also, and that is a novelty, we also organize ethics audits. So we don't limit ourselves to the so-called ex-ante ethics appraisal process, but we also dedicate lots of resources nowadays to what is going on the ground. And that's why I call this ethics in action, because we don't want, and we saw that, and especially when it comes to AI being a quite dynamic technology, we saw that most of the problems, ethics problems, arise once the project starts. And this is where researchers sometimes are feeling unguided, and then most of them not being trained on ethics issues, not sometimes being experienced enough to handle ethics issues, complex ethics issues, ranging from where to ask for ethics approvals to issues that relate to how they set up an impact assessment plan, a data privacy plan, or AI, fundamental rights impact assessment framework. So with the process, the AI there is a self-standing issues, triggers our involvement automatically. And also it's important to mention that the process, the approach we follow when it comes to AI is the so-called ethics by design. So we really think that the ethical side of things when it comes to AI projects, and in general, but especially when it comes to AI, needs to be looked at the very beginning. And that is something which has become almost a learning exercise for the whole research community. 15 years ago, the ethics issues table used to be filled in 5 minutes before the official public, submission deadline. I'm not saying that this is not done like this. This is not the standard practice in certain domains, but we see a lot of improvement. We saw that nowadays researchers dedicate whole sections on and reflect within the application on how they are going to handle certain ethics issues. And that is why we decided also to put forward this ethics by design approach, meaning that researchers, we call researchers, we invite researchers to sit together with their data protection colleagues, the ethics colleagues, in order to find out, to make what we call an educated guess about the ethical dimension of the research. And also because, and those ones that are, let's say, not specialized, but involved in the field of philosophy of science, sociology of science, know well that design choices are not morally neutral. Design choices have certain ethical repercussions, ethical effects at the later stage of the research. And that is why we go for that type of approach. There are questions in the ethics section, which is number 8, that researchers are expected to answer, applicants are expected to answer, as to whether their activity involves the development, deployment, or use of artificial intelligence systems. And then we provide some guidance as to what we expect, what type of information is expected to be provided, from detailed risk assessments or explanation as to how the participants should be informed about. Also, aware of the time, I'll try to wrap up in the next 15 minutes. So there are questions, and we also provide some model answers as to what the researchers or applicants or beneficiaries need to respond. There are some who have standardized some of these ethics requirements, and in order also to make all these issues a bit more visible and highlight the need for researchers to address these dimensions of the research, the involvement of people, and the need for them to be aware and to understand how AI is going to be, what is the actual purpose, meaning, and rationale behind this, the design or the whole process of developing such a system, to ensure that there is human oversight, transparency, and auditability of the systems. Auditability has become a major industry in the field of AI nowadays. The issue of bias, of course, which is the holy grail of when it comes to AI ethics. Data protection and privacy principles. There also we follow the privacy by design approach of the GDPR. The impact of the research, and there we, being an ethics, managing an ethics appraisal process, we're trying to address issues of the societal dimension of AI systems. So we're asking researchers to reflect a bit about on what they think, how they have thought about how relevant, how societally important the research is, and whether the research itself is responding, corresponds to certain ethical, societal challenges. We have also published guidance on ethics by design. It's a public document, in order to make sure that the researchers understand what we're expecting them to address or deliver as a design approach. And this is not work, it's work published by us but not done by us. This work was done by an expert group that was, I would say, a group of experts that came out from 3 different flagship projects that we used to fund, and they came up with this methodology. What we're now doing is to produce more guidelines on what we call very tricky, sensitive, complex, controversial issues on ethics, and they are going to be published soon. One is on algorithmic bias and fairness and how that could be addressed in the frame of a research project. The guidance note on informed consent and how the traditional notion of informed consent on making sure that people that are involved in the project know well, understand well the purpose of the research and how exactly the terms and conditions of their involvement. We're also going to issue a guidance note on the so-called ethics audits. We are going to put forward a certain methodology as to how this audit should be performed. And last but not least, we are going to issue a note on the so-called human rights impact assessment. That is a requirement under the AI Act, and I would say mutandis, we're trying also to develop a similar one for research projects. As I said at the very beginning, we are not alone in this endeavor, we are not alone in this journey. Our work, the work of the EU, is only part of what is done internationally, and by that I'm referring to the work of UNESCO, that a few years ago they came up with a recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, a very important document, not only in terms of content, but also in terms of normative impact, simply because it has been signed by 193 member states. And UNESCO being a UN body, any initiative acquires a global dimension. I also need to mention that UNESCO made a brilliant job in trying also to put forward, in trying to go a bit further than just issuing a recommendation. And they have nowadays managed to, let's say, put together a couple of instruments: the readiness impact assessment, the ethical impact assessment, and the readiness assessment methodology, that they are trying to help member states around the world to integrate these tools, these mechanisms into their own public administration. Because for those ones that are involved in the field of AI, lots of countries in the world are trying to integrate AI systems in order to make their own public, let's say, sectors more efficient. And that is, again, a process that requires careful oversight, and the tools that UNESCO is putting forward, I think, are quite important in that respect. We also have the AI principles that the OECD produced a few years ago. Actually, OECD was the first organization that came up with these principles that were later on picked up and adopted by G7 and other entities. We have the Hiroshima process, that is a G7 process, the Blaisley Declaration, which is mostly focused on safety issues, and last but not least, I would also say the Council of Europe Framework Convention that was adopted a few months ago, a very important document, not only because of the fact that the Council of Europe is, I would say, the gatekeeper or the main organization when it comes to the protection of fundamental rights in Europe, but also because of the fact that the text is rather good, is extremely good, its normative, I would say, value is high, and it hasn't only been signed by the 46 members of the Council of Europe, but also, surprisingly enough, by other non-Council of Europe members such as US and Canada. So we see what we see here is quite, I would say, hyperactivity in the field of the ethics of AI. There are so many different organizations involved, from companies that are trying to, put forward corporate social responsibility trademarks, but to academic institutions, but also international organizations that are trying to put together a framework I would say, that takes the form of set of principles sometimes, of codes of conduct, of declarations, but all these efforts are trying to, at the end of the day, help make sure that the research and technology is designed in an ethically sound way. We have also produced guidelines on the use of generative AI. That was a necessary exercise because generative AI is around the corner. Generative AI is used by researchers in order to draft their own research proposals. So we need it, and we need to be careful in how we guide researchers, in how we guide applicants when it comes to generative AI tools, and how this should be used in the frame of a competitive process. There are institutions, I would say outside Europe, that have issued a red line. They don't allow this type of technology to be used when it comes to research actions. We decide to go in the middle to issue some principles in a voluntary way. So we put forward reliability, honesty, respect, and accountability. And this is a dynamic document, and we are trying to take account the comments and the feedback we receive from researchers, research organizations, and other research funders. I don't know if we have the time. I'll try to wrap up in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Beyond the work that is done strictly on the ethics appraisal of projects and the ethics, I would say, mapping of AI actions, there is work done, as I said at the very beginning, on the Innovation Fund. And why do I bring that forward? Simply because that even there in the communication on boosting startups and innovation, and then the issue of trustworthy AI came forward. And so one of the access criteria for these startups, in order to train their models in one of the 7 supercomputing facilities of the European Union, is to make sure that the research, that their own, let's say, research plan is there towards the development of trustworthy AI and respects EU values and rules. And it's important to see how this is going to be translated into actual let's say, action steps. We also had, a couple of months ago, the AI Continent Action Plan that the Commission is released in order to make Europe a global leader in AI. There are several actions in that action plan. Some of them refer to the establishment of AI factories and gigafactories, the establishment of the so-called Invest AI facility, the AI Skills Academy, and there are some very good ideas that are going to be implemented in the next few months. Within this AI Continent Plan, we have 2 upcoming initiatives, the Apply AI Strategy and the AI in Science Strategy, which is going to be released between October and November. So basically there, the work of the EU is to make sure that, is to safeguard that Europe is harnessing the benefits of AI, but is also doing that by making sure that the risks involved are taken care and are handled in a responsible way. After that, we are going to see a release of other initiatives that relate to AI in many forms: the Data Union Strategy, the Cloud and AI Development Act, the AI Gigafactories Initiative. So have all sorts of, I would say, actions that are in the pipeline, and hopefully they are going to be implemented and taken, become real, not text, but I would say real implementable actions in very soon, and I would say before 2027, in the next 2 years. I don't want to bore you with this background information and about AI in science. Just a few things about the goals of this initiative, because we're heavily involved. Our scope, our main aim is to make sure that AI becomes more impactful and productive in the EU, that the use of AI in science makes science more impactful and productive, that we allow researchers to make use of these systems in order to advance innovations and to make sure that innovations drive economic growth and also tackle societal challenges. We need to accelerate. That is where EU is lagging, I would say, has stayed behind, the acceleration of the uptake of scientific results, and also to make sure that we manage the impact on the scientific process, as I said, in an efficient way. I'll stop here. I had some slides on the environmental side of things, but I don't know if there is time. What I want to make sure that I refer to, sorry. Oops. I don't need to upload a slide on that. I can conclude by saying a few things. First of all, right now there is a major issue. There are 4 challenges, I would say, when it comes to ethics, to the need for AI to move forward in an ethically or trustworthy manner. The first challenge is the governance level. At which governance level do we achieve the best possible ethical handling of things? Do we leave things at the lowest level, at the level of the local institution? Do we come forward, do we allow member states, the national actors, to take care of the ethic, to become ethical managers, as we say? Or do we intervene? Do we continue being there as a funder, as a major funder, but also as a supranational regulator to control, to supervise, to oversee these ethics governance initiatives in order to make sure that there is some consistency? Or should we aim for a EU, as many actors are calling for, a UN accord, a UN framework agreement on AI, and within that agreement to have some ethics provisions? So the first question is the governance question. The second question is a question of operationalization. And that is what we are trying to achieve. To move away from these abstract notions or approaches to AI, to the ethics of AI, and to make sure and to make an extra effort in order to embed AI ethics into the day-to-day activities, the day-to-day, I would say, actions, the day-to-day lab work of researchers. And this is a difficult job because it requires training, it requires guidance, it requires, as I said, making these principles a bit more tangible, a bit more understandable by the scientific community. The third question is whether ethics should be seen as a roadblock, whether ethics should be seen as an obstacle to innovation, as an obstacle to simplification, because right now in Europe, if you follow the discussion, the main challenge, or what they have, what the main actors have, let's say, concluded, is that EU is lagging behind in terms of competitiveness, in terms of technological relevance. So we need to simplify the regulatory environment. We need to simplify, let's say, the procedural and administrative arrangements, and make sure that researchers get access, have access to funding, good funding, different diverse ranges of funding, and also once the research findings, the research outcomes are there, we need to find smart ways to make sure that the research becomes commercialized or delivers tangible, I would say, economic outcomes very soon. And within that narrative, ethics sometimes is portrayed as an unnecessary red tape mechanism. And that is, I would say, a third challenge. Of course, we don't think that any ethics activity should be seen like this, but we understand the need to make sure that ethics shouldn't become a bureaucratic requirement, should be seen as a natural, inherent design element of the whole process. And the fourth and last challenge is the fact that we have so many, as I said at the very beginning, so many initiatives right now in the field of AI ethics that create two types of risks. The first risk is the risk of what we call ethics fragmentation. So many actors, there are more than 260 initiatives right now in the field of AI ethics worldwide. And researchers are confused. Researchers are coming back to us, to our help desk, and ask us, guys, there's We have principles in my university. We have a national AI strategy with ethical principles where we live. You have your own principles. UN has its own approach. To which principles do we need to adhere to? And I understand that this is a major challenge. And the second risk is the risk of the so-called ethics washing. So many people start talking or already talk and work on ethics, but nobody or very few of them are actually doing something about that. So this is another risk that we see a lot in the field of ethics. We see a lot also in the field of green ethics, the greenwashing as we so call it. So we have to make sure that we address these risks. And there are ways to do that. But I thought of sharing these thoughts with you because I think are important, and I think are also related to the whole discussion about what type of AI do we need in Europe, and how do we go about that, and how do we make sure that the so-called trustworthy or human-centric AI is actually becoming a reality. Is going to become a reality very soon. And I'll close here, and I would like to thank you very much.
If there are any questions from the online audience or live audience, it would be welcome.
There is a question, right? Please. Okay. You may ask. Or
where do you see this? A lot of different initiatives, as you see. Where do you see the way forward for European researchers to comply, but also to self-aware of those different kind of guidelines and things out there, and how you can actually helping them to kind of overcome those acts, but stay with European values of human-centric and sustainable products that they are going to research and eventually get it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I hope that what we do is the right thing, and the way we try to put together all these pieces in one single framework is helping them, is helping at least European researchers understand what are the expectations from us as a funder, but also how do we see this trustworthy approach to AI. There is a problem, there is a challenge, I would say, to make sure that the researchers, especially when they apply for our funds, understand well the standards against which they are going to be assessed, and understand well what they should deliver in terms of ethically sound research. For that, we have developed, we move around to having these guidelines of the high-level expert group as I would say, the holy gospel, as the main reference point. And upon that, we are trying to build all sorts of operational frameworks in order to make sure that these principles, the quite, I would say, sometimes vaguely worded principles, are understood by the scientific community. We don't see ourselves as a police force. We don't see ourselves as being there to punish researchers simply because they didn't understand well, or they didn't, let's say, reflect a lot, or they didn't reflect at all when it comes to. We are there. We see ourselves as educators, as funders that are trying to somehow help them learn, help them understand, help them realize that what they are going to do is a type of activity that is full of moral dilemmas, moral hazards, and especially to those ones that are quite young and inexperienced, we see an extra need for us to be overcautious and over-vigilant as to what they are planning to do. And all these exercises with the reports and the screenings and the assessments done by panels, and it took us a lot of time to convince them that this is not, shouldn't be seen as something that is undermining your research. Right now we see that they take them on good faith, and they are looking forward to receiving them in order to understand what exactly they're expected, exactly they're expected to move around, and what is needed from a legal point of view, because most of them are legal requirements. But there is, of course, the risk, the challenge is still there. Having so many different ethics frameworks in place at the national level, at the local level, with some very proactive universities saying these are our principles or this is the way to go. We don't try to impose a one-size-fits-all approach to things. Let me get it right. It's what we are putting forward is what we call voluntary models or best practices. It's up to you. Nobody will be taken to the court if he didn't or she didn't apply these principles. But we put forward one framework that we think is good enough, is balanced enough, is rational enough, and is not overwhelming, is not triggering so many administrative requirements, but at the same time is not going to be used as an ethics coaching exercise. We're trying to put them a bit more homework for them to learn, and understand the ethical risks that this technology may raise. Not to approach it as a complete source of risks, but to also understand their own societal responsibilities, the responsibilities they have before the society when they develop a certain system, and especially when they are trying to test the system with, volunteers, or in an educational setting, or in an open setting with cameras, or with, or in a migration setting, and we have sensitive type of research protocols that are where you see that the researchers are not necessarily exposed enough to this type of ethical questions. And hopefully, and fortunately, when they see the reports and when they receive what the experts have produced, and they call us back, and we see that a year later, they start following the right track, I would say. And after the end of the project, we see them even developing ethics courses in their own universities in order to teach younger generations, or to have this process, these courses in place also to support the project management process, especially when it comes to big universities that receive many grants, hundreds of grants, and they need ethics officers. They need people to advise their own researchers as to what is the Commission or other funding institutions are expecting. I don't know if I respond to your question, but I gave you the whole probably landscape of challenge.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you believe that in future the Horizon Europe projects should be accompanied with measurable indicators that track the ethical performance? Because currently we fill some compliance checklists, or we agree on the terms, but there are applications or projects in AI that consider surveillance systems, real-world scenarios with AI, deep learning, or hiring systems that predict or, hiring systems how work. Do you believe that in the future projects we should measure the ethical performance? Or make some applications or KPIs? I don't know if I'm asking correctly.
Yeah. No, that's a very good question. We're now working on the idea behind putting some values on ethics, which is extremely difficult. It's very difficult to quantify ethics, and having, let's say, been exposed to all these discussions about how to simplify our work, sometimes we feel that we are doing the opposite by trying to make it another, I would say, scientific assessment exercise. But I think, I'll give you an example. There is going to be most probably a project that we're going to fund on trying to identify or develop a methodology on what we call ethical readiness for AI, ethical readiness assessment structures. So yes, the ideas are there, but we have to be very careful in how to integrate them into our system, so as not for us to be seen as imposing all sorts of unnecessary administrative burdens, or starting, let's say, assessing people, researchers, as to whether they are ethically conscious or ethically ready or not. there is a lot of attention that needs to, political attention that needs to be put in the semantics of the discussion. But back in the essence of your question, I think, yeah, we should find a way to make sure that we also assess and classify these risks.